welcome back to the second video in this series. By the way, before I forget, some of the footage in this video doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the channel of Ryan J. I used some of his footage in the last video, specifically for the auto and the whiteface segments, and I just want to point out that some of the footage belongs to him and not me, because I don't want to spend another 6 months trying to get footage for this video. So yeah, go to his channel, there'll be a link in the end card and there'll be an info card that shows up right now. Go check him up, I'm extremely grateful for being able to use this footage. Like, a majority of the DLC, like, itself, the footage that you'll be seeing will be mine, but like, specifically for the endless segments, those belong to him. Because the endless segments is where the RNG is gonna get me absolutely fucked over for the next 6 months if I try and record any of it. But after my first video on Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion and its specimens, there were a few extra details that I either missed completely or got slightly wrong, so I'm gonna go over those really quick before we get into the other ones in this list. First of all, in Otto's locale, in order to actually see the clown, you need to press the clown button in the room, and then he will appear in the cage. It's not a matter of RNG, it's just you press that button and he shows up. We'll also be talking a little bit about the clown later in this mechanic, so I'll hold on till later for that. Number 2, with Specimen 9's AFK detection, it works not just for if you're not pressing any buttons, but only for as long as you don't move, like as long as you're not pressing WASD. So you're still able to look around and use the axe and the sword, but Specimen 9 will still come after you. Number 3, also for Specimen 9, his Cat DOS secret entries are available starting at room 400, not 900. Number 4, Unknown Specimen 4's theme was composed not by Akumakura, but instead by Jarn Christ, who also made tracks for the end credit sequence and the Spooky Cart minigame. Number 5, Spooper does actually have a locale, but it's just based on a normal room, but with 4 doors, which is why it's hard to tell that it is actually his locale. But that is his locale. And number 6, lastly, Specimen 4 was not in fact replaced by Specimen 6 in the Dollhouse DLC, but was instead replaced by Specimen 11. And also, just because I'm not going to be talking about them in this list, but in the DLCs they do get some changes. Specifically in the Dollhouse DLC, there's a section called the Hellgate section, where Specimen 11, 6, and 8 all have their own individual chases, which have changes to their original chases in the base game. First of all, for Specimen 11, his locale is similar to the fast food restaurant that we find him in. We see a large variety of rooms, and some of which are very maze-like, which can be very deadly for Specimen 11. You will also find hanging meat in some of those rooms, like the ones that we find in the freezer. During the chase, we actually go into a version of the restaurant, but now it has some stairs where we'll go through a smaller version of the fun tunnel, and his death screen actually carries on from his normal version. If you remember before, the last line of his death screen was "to the end with bad effect." This time we start off with that line. "To the end with bad effect, my path a single architect, grease and blood and bone within, a chorus for eternal din." On top of this, like last time, we also have a line of binary text, which when translated reads as follows. "Food feeds the body, words feed the mind." Which, if you saw in the last video, add into the whole vibe that Specimen 11 already has. And also, if you haven't watched that first video, I would suggest going and watching it, because I talk about all of the base game specimens there. And similar to Specimen 11, Specimen 8's whole chase is the same vibe as its starting room, but now it has some added windows, and violent deer are just in the rooms that he's chasing you in. The final room that we come into before running into the Hellgate is a cabin that leads out into the forest, and after shattering the Hellgate source, Specimen 8 gets a new voice line. "Praise be my architect." And once again, we get a different death screen text, which reads, "And as I slept and as I grew, something stirred, both root and sinew. I cannot eat, nor can I starve. A face on a great tree did I carve. It spoke to me, it whispered things. It demands more life, demands more rings." Both of these are a reference to Biegatov, which is a character from Lost in Vivo, which is one of Akumakura's other games. And finally, for Specimen 6, his rooms are once again similar to his locale, except we now have shadow puppets hanging from the ceiling. Knocking him down still works, except he will get back up after a few seconds. And like the others, he has a final room, which for him is one of the rooms that we find in his locale, where you're meant to stand in the center of the room and the doors will become translucent. And once again, he has a different death screen, this time reading, "My children drowned, so I took theirs for mine. I sew them up with long silver twine. I use my wood drill and bore into their eyes. Speak not, my child, I will silence your cries." Which, once again, if you remember in the base game, Specimen 6 turns people into living dolls, so it fits his character. But that is it for all the changes of the base game specimens that we'll be seeing in this video. For this part of the tier list, I'll be talking about the Karamari Hospital and the Dollhouse DLCs, Monsters and Dolls. Both DLCs have relevance to the base game, and both involve being diverted from the main mansion at some point in time. At the start of the Hospital DLC, we branch off the main path and into a decrepit looking room with ripped wallpaper, and Spooky greets us by saying that she doesn't know how we got down here, and that she didn't even remember that there were rooms down here. From that point on, after entering the hospital, we're kind of just tasked with running around and solving puzzles. There are also 2 different endings that you can get, depending on whether or not you choose to kill the monsters or not. At the start of the Dollhouse DLC, we're once again ventured off the main path, before walking into a room where text appears on screen stating, "The air is heavy with must and mold. Your lungs seem to struggle as you inhale. Your ability to heal is hindered in this place." And from someone who most definitely has a dust allergy, I mean, I sneeze with the power of the fucking sun and my hands swell up anytime I go into any old dusty place. This DLC is just scary straight off the bat from the get-go. There's a reason that not being able to breathe is high up on my scare list. It is nowhere near a fun experience. And once again, we must go around solving puzzles, occasionally meeting with Spooky, but this time we have to look after a doll. And if we don't, bad things happen, and that's basically it. Of course, there's a lot more to the DLCs, including lore and stuff, but we're not here to talk about the DLCs, we're here to talk about the monsters. But much like the base game specimens, we'll have monsters and dolls who act like the specimens, except this time they'll either have a set room that they're staged to show up in. Either that, or they'll show up after a certain set of criteria has been completed, but apart from that, let's get straight into it. Oh yeah, and also just really quick, before we actually do start, I am referring to the HD version of the game during all of this. There's an OG version which has different changes to it, but I'm directly referring to the HD version. Also, quickly before I go into any of the characters, we're using the same criteria as last time. Going for what tier they are on the tier list, what spook factor they have, their physical design, their in-game design, their location and music, and their death screen. But coming to our first character on the list, coming in at number 12, we have our first monster from the Karamari Hospital DLC. Coming in at tier F, we have Monster 1, who for spook factor has little to none spook factor. Monster 1 is a security guard with no eyes and most notably, large meatball-sized arms. From the elbow down, his arms are just completely swollen and there are no visible hands or fingers to be found. For his in-game design, Monster 1 appears in a hallway past a sealed door. After the power has been turned off, the player will be able to enter this hallway. At first, he'll just be standing there blocking a stairway, however after entering one of the rooms in the hallway and re-entering, he will begin to patrol. Hitting him with the sword or the axe 6 times will successfully kill him. He will not respawn, and it is possible to kill him when he's blocking the stairway. If you decide to use the sword to kill the virus, which is that blockage that you find in the basement, it will also kill him too. This also works if you decide to use the acid on him. Just, if the virus below in the basement gets killed, he also gets killed. It's like they're connected. His patrol pattern is seemingly random, but if the player gets too close to him, he'll slowly turn to face them and then start going towards them. He is also one of only 2 characters to not be included in the Endless version of the game. For locale, his locale is just the hallway that you find him patrolling, and he doesn't really have much of a theme to him. It's more of just the ambience that the hallway has, which is still pretty good, but it doesn't really belong to him, so I'm not gonna give him much points for that. On top of this, he doesn't have a death screen and just uses the default one. And to be honest, the only reason that I have Monster 1 at this tier is just there is a massive lack of content compared to the other characters on the list. He has a good design and he has good potential, he just doesn't really have much added onto him other than that. And moving straight out of F tier and into D tier, nobody comment about the fact that there's no E tier. I don't know where the E tier went. We don't talk about the E tier. However, for our next monster, we have Monster 3, also known as Babyface, which in its spook factor, I would just call it the weird distorted crying noise that starts playing anytime it enters the room. For a physical design, Monster 3 is an abnormally large baby head with a crying face. The baby head is surrounded in a rusted metal frame, and its face will sometimes change to other distorted looking faces. And like a lot of other parts in Spookies, Babyface's design is actually based off of the fleshed lips from Silent Hill 2, which I can give a heavy amount of appreciation for that. In-game, when Monster 3 appears, the player will start hearing whining noises. Babyface can appear in a few select rooms of the secret laboratory that you find it in, and once spawned in, it will slowly float through walls towards the player. It can be killed by the sword, and it will not respawn after that. In the original version of the game, it used to be able to respawn, but that was taken away. In the Endless version of the game, Babyface starts in a room with a rusty metal catwalk. After entering the door at the end of it, we'll find Monster 3 and the chase will begin. It can appear anywhere in the room and can be a heavy inconvenience due to how much smaller the rooms are in the mansion compared to those of the secret laboratory. As Babyface has a really big hitbox, it therefore makes the rooms extremely cramped. However, if he's hit with the axe or the sword, it will teleport outside of the player's field of view and will deduct a room off of its chase. This can be repeated until there are no more rooms to deduct, and then it will just go away. The secret laboratory that we find Monster 3 in can be found down a long dark staircase, very reminiscent of the Silent Hill 2 stairway, going down into the underground prison under the Historical Society. The laboratory is grungy and grimy looking and filled with a light fog, and is honestly one of the best looking areas in the whole DLC. For music, Babyface used to play the theme Old Experiments, which is what you're hearing right now. However, in the Endless version of the HD renovation, it is taken out of his chase. This music does still appear in the main DLC for it though. And sadly, once again, Babyface doesn't have a death screen and just uses the default one. But unlike Monster 1, the reason that Babyface is so far down on the list is just because he's just so boring and tedious, especially in the Endless mode. And while he isn't really F tier worthy, he still serves a somewhat good job in the DLC. He just isn't interesting to be any higher than a D tier. Coming up next is Frenzy, who is our first character from the Dollhouse DLC, who is also a D tier. Her spook factor is just sudden screaming and dark silhouettes, because for her physical design, Frenzy is a dark silhouette with glowing white eyes and teeth. She has a short messy hair and wears a ripped up dress, and she's holding a knife in her right hand. For in-game design, Frenzy will appear in some of the rooms when the doll that you're supposed to be looking after for the whole DLC is in a low mood. or when it is not being held by the player. She will stand still in a part of the room that she spawns in until approached, where she will then charge at the player. She can be killed by VX though, which, if you time it right, means that you'll just never have to deal with her, basically. On top of this, you can make it so that she just doesn't spawn whatsoever by either constantly holding the doll or making sure that the doll isn't in a low mood. For locale and music, Frenzy doesn't really have a locale because she can just spawn in any of the rooms of the house. But to be specific, she will appear in 3 different zones: a bedroom in the west wing, in the hall of the GL Labs area, and in 4 possible spots in the secret area in the Great Hall. After being killed by Frenzy, the screen will be filled by static, and every now and then a red flash and a metallic clang can be heard. And this, of course, is accompanied by the text: "Frenzied torment, distorted mind, blood to spill, bones to grind. The flesh it takes from time to wind, eye for eye makes all turn blind." Which paints this picture that Frenzy's reason for attacking us has to do with the mistreatment of the doll. Eye for eye is very similar to an eye for an eye, which gives off the feeling that Frenzy sees it as, if we hurt the doll, she's gonna come after us, which is just a neat little character trait for such a small character to have. I mean, when I played through the DLC for the first time, I didn't even see her until it was afterwards when I was going through the wiki page, which is when I found out that she existed. And even though she doesn't have a whole lot to her, I still appreciate her as a character. And as an improvement to the other 2, she at least has a death screen, so that counts for something. And coming out of D tier, we have the clown, who is tier C, ironically, C for clown. Spooks is also, he's a clown. But going into physical design, obviously he's like a clown. He has clown makeup. He has a painted on red nose, a wide grin, the eyeline thingies that clowns have that I could not find if it had a fucking name or not, and pale skin. He wears a yellow and red striped shirt, with the sleeves being a polka dot design instead, which makes them more like his pants, which are instead blue and pink in color, also with a polka dot design. And on top of all of this, he is just absolutely fucking covered in grime. Moving on to in-game, he can be found in a cage in the clown room, the room that everybody has in their house, and anytime the player looks away from him, he will move closer from inside of the cage and will change to a different pose. After leaving the room, the clown will say bye-bye, and after burning the pair of hands in the puzzle involving the furnace, he will then take this opportunity to escape from the cage and will occasionally appear in the northern side of the Great Hall, as well as the entrance to the Great Hall or in Wormy Charles' storage room. The clown is completely harmless and is a lot like Specimen 1, where he's just kind of there for a quick spook. And like his behavior when in the cage, he will move closer to the player when looked away from. This continues even if the game is paused, so if you pause the game when you're looking away from him, you can get quite the shock when you turn back around. In the endless mode of the game, he can be optionally let out into the retrace pool from Unknown Specimen 2's locale. And if you want to go and see me talk about Unknown Specimen 2, you can do so in part 1. But what I didn't mention is that the room is to the left of the dining area. It's a large room with an empty cage, and on the opposite wall to the cage there is a button. Similar to the elevator button, but instead of it reading down, it reads clown. And the message clown with a question mark will pop up when you get close to the button. Pressing the button will play a party horn sound. Pressing it 3 times will spawn the clown in the cage. After this, the button will stop working, and to open the cage, you must hit it with either the sword or the axe. And if done correctly, when leaving the room, you will hear a familiar bye-bye from before. It won't start its chase immediately unless you decide to press the button again after freeing him. And once again, he is just completely harmless, but he can body block the player, making him somewhat dangerous when combined with other specimens, and also he says bye-bye again when he stops chasing. The clown room is very distinct compared to the rest of the dollhouse. The floor is covered in polka dot patterns and has a very colourful vibe compared to the rest of the house. However, this doesn't stop the doll from covering its eyes when entering the room. And he doesn't have a chase track, sadly. It would have been really nice if we just had the silly clown music whenever he showed up. And same with his death screen, obviously, because he's completely harmless. He just doesn't have one because he can't kill you. And much like Specimen 1, the reason that he's higher on the list compared to the specimens before him is he's just a silly little guy, and I love silly additions in horror games. Sometimes I feel like horror games can become too serious in their horror, and adding silly little features like this is always something that I will enjoy. Sticking into tier C, we have the Husks, and for spook factor, it's just ew. The Husks look like broken baby dolls, and the bottom of their head is broken off, leaving just a completely open bottom jaw. Part of their head is gashed in blood, and their chest is just cracked open. Occasionally, their eyes will look around, and I will say it openly and proudly that I am so glad that I am basing these off of the HD version. Because that means I only have to play the HD version, because if I had to go back to the OG version and see these fuckers, it would probably make me want to close down the game and never open it up as long as I breathe. This is a case for 3 of the other characters on this list, as well as the base specimens, where I feel like the new HD versions make them look a lot less scary than their older 2D versions. Not all of them, some of them actually improve the scariness, but either way, it's still a nice design. Also, a little fun fact is that the sprites that were originally made for the Husks in the OG version were made by Akumakira by using real dolls, which were then modified through a green screen, which is why they look so creepy. This is also used for other, more doll-looking dolls, like the Clicky. In-game, Husks are first encountered in the West Wing after obtaining the key from the piano room. They will also later appear in the Northside studies as well. Later on, they are encountered in an inactive state in the Great Hall. 12 Husks are placed in front of an electric barrier by Spooky after the player obtains the GL Labs area keys from the doll's hands that we burn in the furnace that I was talking about before. The player must put the doll on the pedestal in the room in order to turn on the barrier, which will activate the Husks and let the player exit the area. The Husks can be killed by the axe, but the Husks also do not appear when you're being chased by Wormy Charles, who we'll be talking about soon. In the Endless version of the Husks, they will appear in large numbers and will come alive from their inactive form as you walk past them, or they will just appear in this active form sometimes. If you decide to attack one of the inactive blobs, it will split into a yellow fluid and will basically remove that Husk from the chase. Once all the globs are gone, the chase will end. Either that or they'll disappear after about 30 to 49 rooms. On top of this, they can even block some of the corporeal specimens during their chase, which, if you don't know, corporeal just means that the ones that are actual physical beings, like, for example, they can go through the walls. In the base DLC, the Husks appear in a variety of places, but in the Endless version of the game, they get their own starting room. The entrance resembles that of the first floor area, and next to the door is a doll, which isn't the same one that we carry in the base game, but it's there. The doll can be brought to the pedestal, where once the doll is placed on it, another electric barrier will activate and the Husks will come alive from their inactive state and the chase then begins. When killed by a Husk, the screen will turn to static, which will soon reveal the Husk's face with the text, "Scarlet burning holes are placed into the skin, and flesh rebound in an unfamiliar form. Molded into something new, the Husk reshaped into a skin more accepting of the howling void." Which connects to the whole experiments that are going on during the DLC from GL Labs, which is where they were basically getting the souls of children and putting them into the dolls, which is what we see throughout the entire DLC. The Husks are basically just the most basic form of this. The Husks are a pretty good doll, and while I do shit on them for not looking as scary as they used to, their gameplay still holds up to what it used to be, and that means that it's still very good in my bugs. And for our next monster, quote unquote, I wouldn't really call it a monster. I mean, even the wiki page for the game calls it a minor enemy, because is really all it is. But it was on the tier list, so I just decided to put it on anyway, because why not? But next up, we have the Scare Chair, which is our first B tier. And like I said before, unlike the other characters on the list, the chair is counted as a minor enemy, so you can only really find it in one room, and you have to actually interact with it for it to do anything. And so therefore, for this specific character, I'm going to do what I did with Specimen 7, and just tell you what happens all at once. In one of the rooms of the hospital, we'll find the Scare Chair, which is just a normal red armchair, with no other kind of features to it apart from the stains that we can see on it. Upon first sitting on the chair, a series of visual and auditory hallucinations will haunt the player for about 3 to 4 minutes. The hallucinations will progressively get more intense as time goes on. When sitting on the chair, the player is unable to move, although they may exit the chair at any time. Doing so will reset the sequence and the player will have to go through it all again. After a while, music will begin to play and particles will begin to float around as the room becomes darker. A trail of blood will appear slowly that leads from the door to the chair, and when the trail becomes fully visible, a humanoid pale face will fade in and out of view from the screen. After 3 minutes has passed, the player will be forced out of the chair, and after leaving the chair, a shadow will be sitting in the chair, stopping the player from sitting back down. However, it can be killed with a sword, which now lets the player sit back down. And upon doing so, the screen will begin to shake and eerie screams will play. Not long after, the player will be killed and we will be greeted by the text, "You awake in a wasteland not meant for you. The ground underneath you screams. The sky above violently pulls you and the air around you presses down, trying to worm its way in." And while it is just a minor enemy and doesn't really cause that much of a danger unless you're like me and get way too curious about things, the Scare Chair is just a really neat addition to the DLC. It's something that you can come across without knowing about it and easily die to it if you're not warned or don't know about it, which is one of my favorite things in horror games. Just the idea of there being little secrets or features that you can run into if you decide to just dig a little bit deeper into it is really nice. Things like Easter eggs and stuff like, well, for example, the chair, you wouldn't know about being able to die to the chair and getting this death screen if you didn't decide to fuck about and find out, you know? Curiosity killed the cat is very prevalent here and I love it so much. Next up we have Becca, also known as Monster 6. She is a tier B monster, and for spooks it's just sliding 2D image. Monster B, also known as Becca, is a tall pale woman with long black hair and a long black dress, which to be honest made me think that she was a nun the first time I saw her, but that's beside the point. She is also the only monster in the DLC that doesn't get a 3D model in the HD version of the game. And she also makes a cameo in the game Cooking Companions, which is one of the rare number of games that managed to scare me just from visuals alone. Also, funnily enough, when I say she doesn't have a 3D model in the HD version, this is only for the actual DLC itself. They made a 3D model of her and only put it in the Endless version, which I find fucking hilarious. In-game, Becca can be found in the secret laboratory, and after walking down a long hallway for long enough, she will appear on the edge of the fog slowly, and after getting close enough, she will charge out of the fog towards the player and instantly kill them. She cannot be killed by the sword. In Endless mode, she will sometimes appear from behind the exit door and the player must run away in order to not be hit. She will fade away after a second or two after coming out of the door, where the screen will flash black to announce that she is gone. While she is chasing the player, the fog from the secret laboratory will also be overlaying the screen. For her locale, we find her in the same hallway that we find her in the secret laboratory. However, fun little fact about her chase theme is that it's actually a reference to Rebecca Black's song Friday, as you can faintly hear her singing the song in the background. To continue off this reference, in her death screen it says "Don't wake up before Saturday," which is just a continuation of this reference. And just like the chair, the reason I like Becca is because she's another Curiosity Killed the Cat kind of feature, where you can only find her if you keep on pushing down the hallway. But unlike the chair, there's a lot more danger to her, and along with the fact that she gets an endless version of her, it's basically just an upgraded version of the chair. And moving on into our top 5, we have Monster 4, who is our first tier A monster, and for spook factor, Monster 4 resembles a person with bandages wrapped around its head. The eyes are not visible through the bandages, but we can see a bunch of teeth inside of its mouth. It also wears a ripped up hospital gown, and on top of all of this, Monster 4 has skeleton hands that end in sharp points. When encountering Monster 4 after leaving its starting room, it will act very similar to Specimen 6, where it only ever fully moves when looking away from it. However, this time, if the player decides to stare at it for too long, then Monster 4 will continue moving towards the player in a short teleporting motion anyway. And this works the exact same in its endless form, except in its endless form it can actually be hit by the axe or the sword and it will just disappear for that room. Monster 4 is another monster that can be found in the secret laboratory. And once the player grabs the key to the isolation zone, it can be seen hanging from a certain type of rope knot that I'm not gonna mention in the corner of the room, and it'll be flickering in and out of view. Also, I'm not gonna show this because YouTube is very serious about that kind of stuff and I don't trust them not to fucking strike me down. But after the player takes the key, it will disappear and the ambient music playing in the room will go silent. And when leaving the room, its chase begins. Its room is very similar to the design of the rest of the secret laboratory, and it is used as its starting room in the endless form and follows the same sequences in the DLC. It will appear in front of the player in the next room before swapping to being behind them after that. Like, the only differences between this room and literally any other room in the secret laboratory is just there's a couple of boxes and chairs and the hanging thing in the corner. And for a death screen, when Monster 4 kills the player, its death screen is shown along with some text that reads as follows. Dark worms scream inside my brain, begging me to eat again. Hearts and blood and bile and soil, I must consume to end turmoil. This combined with the twitching motion of the monster in the background creates this very eerie looking death screen compared to other ones in the DLC. And there is quite a bit to unpack with this. The first of which being that during the flashes there is a variety of different images, which one of them gives evidence to the monster being a patient who used to be in the hospital, who, well, you can guess what happened to him. This is burrowed into deeper by the fact that the monster could represent autophagia, which if you don't know what it is, it's basically when a person begins to eat themselves. Yeah, this monster is not a cherry one, but this can be inferred by the death screen text along with the fact that it has bony hands. On top of this, the phrases I must consume and what do you think you're looking for can be seen at certain points, and probably the most odd part of it all is there is a QR code that leads to a life hack quote website. And while the idea of horror media's digging into some of the stuff that this monster includes is something that for the most part, I'm not the biggest fan of, especially if it's just to create a feeling of shock by trying to make, like, the most brutal thing that you can imagine. Monster 4 manages to not be like that. Like, the only times that we see this stuff is either for one room or somewhere that you'd have to be actively searching for the stuff. I believe that Monster 4 takes what other horror producers would have made a big thing out of just to make unnecessary shock factor, and builds it in a way that isn't obnoxious and is a really good example of how stuff like this can be executed well. And For that, it is definitely worthy of one of the top 5 spots. Also, on top of this, it has the added points of scaring the literal shit out of me the first time I encountered it in endless mode. Yeah, much like the endless form of Specimen 4, the scream that you hear when it appears is a part of its chase theme. And even when just talking about the music theme, you can just take the title of it and it is still an absolute banger. I feel like the title T-Rexes Can't Wear Mittens is such a silly name. Also, this isn't the only type of soundtrack that Spookies has that has a silly name. Just search up literally any of the Spookies soundtrack and you will have a blast reading all the names. So at least for as dark as the Specimen can be, it still has a very lighthearted title to its chase theme. Next up is Wormy Charles, who is a tier A doll. The spooks for him is that he is just a constant threat throughout the entire DLC. For a physical design, Charles is a fleshy, worm-like creature, but imagine if a worm had other worms for limbs except for his head, which is a doll head. The main torso part of his body is black, but the limbs are a fleshy orangey color, and he moves in this very boneless way. Like, he sways around in a way that shows that he is literally just worms. Wormy Charles is a very accurate name. After encountering him in the storage room, Charles will begin patrolling around some areas of the house, and will not return to the storage room. He will then walk around until the player is in line of sight and will begin to give chase. He can be heard walking around in adjacent rooms. When entering his line of sight, TV static will flood the screen as Charles begins to chase after the player, where he will get a boost in speed. However, he's really easy to avoid by going into another room where he cannot follow you. He can also be killed if successfully hit with the axe 10 times, where afterward he will not appear again. In his endless form, he has a similar gameplay style where he will appear either at the entrance or another point in the room, until the player is in line of sight where he will begin to chase them. However, the static is taken out of the endless form, and like the Husks, he can also body block the player, which can be very inconvenient at times. The location that we find Charles in is in the house's storage room. In this room, we can find him in the back corner in an inactive state, with the key to the current puzzle on him. After picking up this key, Charles will wake up and proceed to chase the player. In the endless mode, he has the same room, but instead this time it is longer and more maze-like. Also, a little fun fact is that Charles is one of 2 characters which have been seen to know how to write, the other one being Specimen 2. And in his locale, we can read this note. "I don't fit in this. I can't stretch or else I break. They did this to me." Oh, and yeah, he would be so much higher on the list too if they didn't change his fucking chase theme from the absolute banger that it used to be. Like, just, here's a quick comparison. This is what it used to be. And this is what it is now. This should be a fucking crime. But either way, if the player dies to Charles, we are shown a person on the stretching machine, and there is the text that reads, "Form within form, writhes and pulses. Skeletal sinews stretched outwards beneath the skin wrapped around it. It pulls until the skin's elasticity falls ultimately. From these small holes, the tendrils of bone finally escape. You will finally free from this constricted bag of flesh." Generally, I feel that Wormy Charles gives off this vibe of "I have no mouth, but I must scream," which goes really hard for his character. The experiments with GL Labs that we were talking about earlier must have been absolutely traumatizing, to say the least, for the souls, and I am so glad that Wormy Charles actually gives us a glimpse into that side of things. I feel like out of all the characters on this list, Charles has the most personality and story going for him specifically, and it is just a really nice thing to add to him. Actually seeing the side where the things that are attacking us have a reason to attack us, or have some kind of motive, or just some kind of thing that happened to them, is just, it's my favorite type of thing to see. And Charles is one of the characters that do this absolutely perfectly. And for our top 3, we're moving into the S tier. Starting with Monster 2, who for spook factor, we have Still Object, moving at high speed. For a physical design, Monster 2 is quite simple. He's just an unzipped body bag with a corpse inside with no mouth and empty eye sockets. And we don't get to see Monster 2 for a long amount of time in the DLC, as it only shows up once in the morgue. But while looking for one of the doctor's badges, we find it and pick it up. After doing so, the screen flashes red and all the body bags in the room will disappear. After attempting to exit the room, we are greeted by a long hallway that is lined with the missing body bags from before, and at the end, we'll find Monster 2 lying on the ground. After getting close to it, Monster 2 will rise from the ground and begin chasing the player. During the chase, the player will get infinite stamina to make it more fair, and after reaching the exit door, the chase will end, and so will our time with Monster 2. Which is really sad, because it's not that long of a hallway at all. You only get one split that you have to deal with. Hitting Monster 2 with the sword will cause the chase to instantly end, and you will be teleported out of the morgue, which I find pretty funny. And in the Endless version, however, we will be greeted by the same starting room. However, instead of it being the body bag at the end of the hallway that will be the one that gets up, it can be any of them. And whichever one gets up will become Monster 2 and will begin the chase. In this version, we no longer get the infinite stamina, and upon catching up to the player, it will damage them before teleporting back to the start of the room. And the axe and the sword will have no effect this time. And also a little fun fact is that this on-hit effect still applies even if the player has invincibility frames. So you can be hit quote-unquote by Monster 2, but you will take no damage, but it will still go all the way back to the start of the room. You can also skip the first time that you are chased by Endless Monster 2 if they begin rising close to the exit door. However, they will still be added to the rechase pool. It's kind of just, if you can get out of there fast enough whilst it's still rising up, then it just doesn't continue to chase you. And like I said before, the locale for Monster 2 is a morgue, which, to be honest, looks really freaky. Like, I am absolutely horrified of hospitals, and morgues are probably one of the #1 reasons for that. But probably what Monster 2 is best known for is that it has an absolute banger of a chase theme, which I gotta say, out of all of like the specimens, monsters, or dolls, Monster 2 is most likely for me to just listen to as normal music. And like a comment on its wiki page says, it's no fucking wonder that they made a section so short, because if they didn't, we'd all just be having a fun time listening to its soundtrack. Like, if I was asked from someone to pick one of the spooky soundtracks to listen to and just play that to a bunch of people, I would pick Monster 2. Sadly though, Monster 2 doesn't have a death screen. However, before encountering him, we'll get a couple of flashing images which state, "Why did you leave your soul behind? The worm feeds on you." Which are both very eerie messages, and I think that if Monster 2 was to get a death screen, it would probably be something along these lines. And while our time with Monster 2 is short, he still manages to be one of my favorite monsters, just from design and music alone. He's one of those characters that you can't go wrong with. I've never had a bad experience with Monster 2. Also, before I start talking about the last two, you will see that these two are longer segments than the others, and you're about to see why. Coming in at my favorite character from the Dollhouse DLC, we have the Husks doll, also another tier S character. The spook factor from this one is similar to Monster 2, where it's just suddenly really fast floating things are scary. The Husks doll is a life-size doll with shoulder-length dark hair wearing a dark pink dress, and at certain points on their body are several hooks that are stuck into her, which gives her the name the Husks doll. And while it doesn't have any kind of gameplay or lore significance, the design similarities between the Husks doll and the doll that you're carrying with you throughout the whole game is just a really nice nod to the Husks doll being one of the last ones that you see in the DLC. Whether or not that was actually intentional for them to look alike, I don't know, but it still looks cool nonetheless. When encountering the Husks doll, either in the normal DLC gameplay or if you're playing the endless mode, she will work the opposite of other specimens that you have to look at. Instead of having to look at her, you instead have to look away from her. Whether or not she is obstructed from your view or not, if you look in the direction of her, she will begin to float towards you. How to tell if you're actually looking at her or not is when you are looking at her, a bit of TV static will appear stronger on the screen depending on how close you are to looking at her. As well as this, her position will change every 10 seconds or so you'll be tasked with swapping your view to not be looking at her. For specifically her endless mode, there is a new blue fog that is added that heavily reduces your ability to see in front of you. During our time in the Dollhouse DLC, we find ourselves in the root cellar after falling through a hole in the GL Labs hallway. While attempting to get out of here, we will be solved with trying to get pinwheel pieces. The root cellar is this dark, dingy place covered with a pinkish maroon colored wallpaper and is shaped like a maze. While searching for the pinwheel pieces, we'll come across the Husks doll, who is, well, hooked to the wall. After taking the pinwheel piece that we find on her, she'll do a small jolt but won't begin to chase us yet. It's only after we find another room and use our axe on the sculpture of a person's back that we find inside of the room that a small vision will play where we see the Husks doll begin to charge at us. And while it doesn't mean anything in that exact moment, after having to come back down to the cellar to look for candles for the Keragenesis ritual in order to start the Hellgate ritual, the doll will come to life and start chasing after us. We are then tasked with trying to find all the candles whilst not looking at her. In the Endless version, we get a small snippet of the root cellar that we find her in, who this time has the key to unlock the door that we enter at the start of the segment. After taking the key, the doll will immediately begin its chase, and if we don't look away fast enough, then we will immediately be hit by her. After this, we just have to find our way out, and the chase continues through the mansion. And for music, I feel like I'd been totally missing out on the Husks doll's theme. It isn't panic-inducing or anything major, but the deep umphs that the song has, along with the heavy breathing that we hear at certain parts of it, create this tune that just matches the Husks doll in a way that I can't describe. It also matches the locale of it having a faint echo in a majority of its notes, kind of like how a big empty cellar would echo at any kind of noise that you make. It's just a really nice fit. For a death screen, I really enjoy the Husks dolls. After being killed by the Husks doll, we are taken to a rusty, bloody room where we are just completely unable to move. Not long afterwards, the Husks doll appears in front of us briefly before we get some text, which, to be honest, makes this one of my favorite death screens from the Dollhouse DLC. A wicked, nasty child was thrown into a pit. No food, light, or water was ever given to it. Punishment was dealt without mercy or hesitation, as if justified by faith or ownership from creation. It was no righteous act, it was hellish, demon-sent. Eventually all will find out, in eternal torment. And not long after the text disappears, we are hit by multiple hook-shaped blades, and after the third blade, we collapse and die. So we can kind of just infer that we get the same treatment as the hooked doll and we just get hooked to death. And you can infer that the wicked nasty child that we hear about could be referring to the hooked doll. Just like the child in the text, the hooked doll was thrown into a pit, which could either be referring to the actual body of the doll or the root cellar itself, where there is no food, light, or water, and it had been hooked up to the wall. And well, now that it's free, there would probably be a lot of torment, as we see after dying, that we just get hooked to death, and that will most likely happen to anyone else that the doll comes across. Overall, the hooked doll is my favorite doll out of the DLC, just from design and the music and the death screen and the possible lore implications of it. Even if I was just referring to scare factor, the hooked doll would win by a long shot. Even while getting footage for this, I had loud music blasting in my ears, and none of the entire DLC was I ever scared until I got to the hooked doll segment. So even while I wasn't even fully immersed into it, I was still horrified of this thing, which just shows how good of a doll it is. But anyway, on to our final character, and possibly the longest segment in this video. And finally, coming to my number 1 monster on this list, and my number 1 monster out of the Karamari Hospital DLC, we have Monster 5, also known as Ghost Cow. And oh boy, when I tell you this one's a long one. Coming in at our final tier S, our spook factor is physical rustiness. Monster 5 is a hairless bull which has been flipped upside down and its legs bent backwards. Bright red eyes and a large open grinning mouth and a long line of flesh leading from where its udders would normally be, up to a giant floating mouth, inside of which is a set of sharp teeth, and most notably, another big red eye. And as I always like to say, it looks like something out of Silent Hill, and funnily enough, those bent back legs will come in later on. And I'd also like to point out that the whole character has this really gritty texture to them, which matches really well with its locale that we'll get into in a minute. When being chased by Ghost Cow, you will get this dark fog that will surround the player. And combining this with the physical design of the Ghost Cow, you get some really spooky scenes. This fog effect can also mess with other specimens, monsters, dolls, etc., and even acid pits. Also, you will find that there's a red ring that forms around the player's UI which will begin to pulsate. And a small difference between Ghost Cow and the DLC itself is in its endless variant. In the DLC, it will hover after the player instead of its old method in the original game of teleporting towards the player. It cannot go through walls, and it can be killed if hit by the sword a few times. However, unlike Monster 2, the player will not be teleported out of the maze that it's in after doing so. It also makes a loud clanking noise when attacking. In the Endless mode, however, it will phase through the door when entering a room and can phase over pits. Speed is increased in the Endless form than it is in the DLC and will move faster than the player's walking speed. A similar effect will happen when hitting it with the axe, but instead this time it will teleport to the start of the room, and after each hit it will deduct a room count from the chase until there is no rooms left to deduct, and the cow will just disappear. There isn't much of a difference between how it acts in the DLC and in the Endless form, but it just has a couple of little tweaks here and there. For locale, we find ourselves in a big rusty metal industrial style maze in the hospital's isolation zone. It is accompanied by the track 100 Angus, which is remixed in its Endless form chase to give very slight differences, but both sounding absolutely amazing and fitting for the grimy environment. While the maze might not be that difficult to get through once you learn the layout, it could still keep you there for quite a while if you don't know where you're going. And in the Endless Mode version, Monster 5's locale is very similar to its normal version, except it's shorter and more maze-like. Walking from the hospital into the maze can be a pretty jarring experience, especially on first playthroughs, and I think that Monster 5's death screen is my favourite out of the Karamari Hospital DLC's monsters, as it brings together what it is all about. Monster 5's death screen consists of a large image of a brain with text overlapping on top of it. This text reads, "Your fear allows me to enter your mind. Your obligation allows me to control your hands. Your reason allows me to break your eyes. Your guilt allows me to loosen your neck. Your expectation allows me to hide the truth. Your tendencies have allowed me to make you." And seeing as the last line is the only one without a full stop, and if you read the second word of each line, you will see the word forget, it has been theorized that the last line when completed will read, "Your tendencies have allowed me to make you forget." But what does this mean in terms of Monster 5? Bovine spongiform encephalopathy, which is also known as mad cow disease, is known to cause deterioration of the brain. One of the symptoms of an animal with mad cow disease is that it loses the ability to control their legs. Remember the legs? You're starting to see where this is going. During our time in the hospital, we will read notes about doctors and other members of staff not remembering that they had done something. Specifically, Nurse Tanaka, Dr. Tochigi, and Dr. Hamada. Do not question how I managed to say encephalopathy and not the name of a fucking doctor. And a few examples of this event happening can be found when in certain rooms of the hospital, we find these notes. Dr. Tochigi, hepatologist. I was just informed that the procedure to extract the patient's liver became fatal. I don't know why. Why did we take his liver? There are no donation requests and he was showing signs of improvement. The surgical staff told me I personally demanded the liver be removed for an emergency transplant. And the worst thing is, I found it. I found his liver. His entire liver. Just sitting on my desk. On top of this, we also have this note from Nurse Tanaka where other staff members have no idea why they are performing these procedures that were absolutely unnecessary. This led to a larger amount of patients being killed by surgical complications. Even Dr. Hamada begins to call these moments of memory loss his other him. And after entering the isolation room, we get 2 more reports from Nurse Tanaka. Report 407. It wasn't me. I swear it wasn't. It may have been my body and my hands, but I know it wasn't me. Report 408. I found out how to stop them. You see, they are in my head and control me for a time. But if I keep pushing the radiology machine to dose my head with radiation, then they go away for a while. We can see the decline that this effect has had on the staff in the hospital. They're resorting to pumping their heads with radiation just to get rid of what is occurring to them, which, by the shaky writing at the end of Report 408, we can see that it is just worsening it. Who would have guessed that? But humans can't get mad cow disease, you say. At least, not in the form of what the cows get. Instead, what humans get is this other form of it, which I'm not going to pronounce that whole entire thing. I'm just going to call it CJD instead, because that is what the acronym is referred to as. And according to the NHS's official website, states, CJD is a rare and fatal condition that affects the brain. It causes brain damage that worsens rapidly over time. And the symptoms for CJD include loss of intellect and memory, changes in personality, loss of balance and coordination, slurred speech, vision problems and blindness, abnormal jerking motions, and progressive loss of brain function and mobility. And from what we can see, most of these symptoms can be seen in the staff at Karamari Hospital. So it is clear to see that whatever is going on with Monster 5 and what it represents is very likely the cause for everything that went wrong in the hospital, which makes it all the more foreboding as it is the last monster that we come across. Monster 5 is what the entirety of the Karamari Hospital DLC had been building up to, especially when looking at the design of the building itself. Over time, it will begin to degrade and get worse, starting off with a normal looking hospital and ending us up in places like the secret laboratory and the isolation zone. Much like the effects of mad cow disease on the brain, it also matches the style of Monster 5's rusty and wearing down vibe that it gives off. And it's pretty easy to see why Ghost Cow is my number one on this list, and it is probably the most stuff that is connected to a character in the entire list. I mean, you could even somehow connect this to Specimen 11 if you wanted to. They both have very similar vibes. The whole thing of the beef and the cow stuff that's going on with Specimen 11 and Monster 5 being a cow. There is even a note that we find about someone stating that while being in the hospital, it feels like there's a demon in their head that is telling them to walk down to hell. Very reminiscent of Specimen 11. And even all of this can connect back to Monster 4, who we inferred could have possibly been a patient at the hospital during its decline. There are so many notes that talk about what happened during the decline of the Karamari Hospital DLC, and it is just, if it's all connected to Monster 5, yeesh, that is one effective cow. Psychological style horror, especially in the way that Monster 5 does it, is one of my favorite genres of horror, probably coming along the same lines of parasite horror and religious horror, those being my top 3 types of horror genres, obviously. But Monster 5 executes the style of psychological horror perfectly, and so that is why, without a doubt, it is my favorite monster out of the entire DLC. And it even has the possibility to be one of my favorite characters out of the entire game altogether, like possibly even outmatching Specimen 4 in her endless form. Monster 5 is just an absolute masterpiece from beginning to end. And oh, did I forget to mention how much his soundtrack fucking bangs? That, like, I've already used my Silent Hill card for this sequence, but I'm using it again. The track that plays with Monster 5 is so much like a Silent Hill track. Like, if before, when I was talking about Specimen 5, I used the Silent Hill card, that would be for Silent Hill 2. Talking about Monster 5, I would say it's like Silent Hill 1. The rusty style to everything just really gives off the Otherworld vibe that Silent Hill 1 has, and if that doesn't give me a reason to boost Monster 5 up to being one of my favorites, I don't know what else would. And with that, we can conclude the second part of our journey through Spooky's weird abomination of specimens, monsters, and dolls. And I gotta say that for a large majority of the specimens and dolls, etc., Akuma Kira and everyone else that worked on the game and its DLCs did an absolutely amazing job the whole way through, bar a specimen or two. Whether it be the physical design or the location we find them in, or maybe just even their music track. I absolutely adore this game and its DLCs from beginning to end. And although this will most likely be the last video I make on the series, unless somehow another game or a DLC gets released in the future, but I do not see that happening if I'm honest. We already have a lot of closure on the story, especially after the Dollhouse DLC, and I really hope it stays that way. As much as I love the franchise and I'm happy to see it end this way, and even though I've said before that ambiguity and mystery is what makes a game scary, we're already told at the end of the base game that, did you really think this was gonna end seriously? So I feel like in Spooky's case, this level of closure it works for it. Spookies is a game that I will continue to hold in my heart for a long time and will definitely come back to from time to time if I need a good scare, but that will be all. Thank you so much for watching. The channel has been growing far faster than I thought it would, and I couldn't be more thankful for it. It means the world to me that you guys enjoy my content, and I will try my best to keep improving as time goes on. Once again, thank you all for your support, and bye-bye.